Jennifer Smith, and this is the Codcast, CommonWealth Beacon's podcast about policy and civic life here in Massachusetts. We've carved out a bit of a series here on this podcast in the last few years on artificial intelligence, looking at ethics, political implications, and journalistic issues. But today we're taking a look at the state itself. Governor Maura Healey, with the legislature's approval, dedicated $100 million in a 2024 economic development bill to create and fund the Massachusetts Artificial Intelligence Hub, or the AI Hub. It's an effort to get into the AI race, which is mostly channeled funding towards Silicon Valley, but they say will be key to bolstering the state's general competitiveness when compared to the rest of the country. So, what kinds of AI are we talking about, and how is the state thinking about the ethics and applications of this widely hyped and widely worried over technology? Well, to get into that, I'm joined by the director of the AI Hub, Sabrina Mansur. Sabrina, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Jennifer.
So, I suppose I should start with the question I ask everyone who comes on here to talk about AI, which is, how do you define artificial intelligence?
Artificial intelligence to me refers to systems that can perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. Things like recognizing speech or analyzing data, even making decisions.
And since we're in kind of the terms section right now, how would you define the Massachusetts AI Hub in terms of what it's for, who's in it, and what it looks like right now as we're talking on Thursday, July 17th?
Sure. So the role of Massachusetts AI Hub is really to convene various organizations, whether it's government, whether it's industry, nonprofits, folks in the education sector, to come together to apply AI to solve real world problems. Uh, Also, we're the central entity for coordinating and managing key assets from the state, and we're looking to build out things like data resources, high performance compute power to really support and enable new innovation and help apply AI as folks are adopting it through education or otherwise.
And so, how many people are actually in there right now? If it's kind of a coordination space, are you sort of the connective tissue between these kind of bigger entities, or is it sort of an innovation space on its own?
So we're the connective tissue, I would say. I think I like that visualization around that. We have probably a few hundred folks who are actually involved, surprisingly, between various working groups to help ideate initiatives that are going to be really impactful, to help provide guidance. It's really the public coming together here to work together. I like to say, there's no such thing as an AI expert. This is an area that is really moving and growing so quickly. I mean, there's AI experts, but not one person can really know everything. So this is a really the movement of the wisdom of crowds here on what can best help folks.
And so, kind of on that note, I think a lot of people might be familiar with kind of this really heavy flow of investor money that seems to be mostly heading in the direction of California or circling around kind of the Silicon Valley space right now. I think to sort of kick us off in talking about sort of the state's interest in AI is to say on a very basic level, why should the state be in the business of AI? Why shouldn't this just be something where investors kind of fight it out amongst themselves?
Yeah, I mean, at first, like to, just double click on that one, right? So we are seeing very, large dollars going out to California, but we have a sizable community and funding within Massachusetts as well. And, interestingly, if you think about it per capita, resident, it's actually quite high. If not higher than what's in California. So it's, a matter of how you're looking at the data. But of course, there's a lot going out to California.
So why is this something that Massachusetts should be kind of investing in as a state entity?
Yes, well, so certainly Massachusetts is wanting to do this thoughtfully, right? And that is why there was a strategic task force convened by Governor Maura Healey. She had a task force of 26 members across various sectors come together and be very thoughtful over the course of a year of what uh, should be done to make sure that Massachusetts continues to be a leader in the AI sector, and make sure that folks are prepared for this very, very rapid adoption of this technology. Um, and so, the establishment of this Massachusetts AI hub was a recommendation from that strategic task force on AI. And so the hub itself was really stood up towards the beginning of this year. I joined as the director but just 2 months ago for the inaugural efforts on this hub. So it's being incubated within the Mass Tech Collaborative, which is a quasi state agency group that is reporting into the economic development group at the state.
And so you personally have been in and around the tech space for a while, working for Draper Labs in Cambridge, which, as a Northeastern grad myself, a lot of us had friends who were doing co-ops in all of these kind of Cambridge-based tech spaces. And then also the driverless car technology company, Motional. So when you think about Massachusetts' place in this kind of rapidly evolving field, given, of course, that Massachusetts has been involved in some version of what kind of became the AI boom for 50, 60, 70 years at this point. Where does the state stand, and where should it stand?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, right? We really are a leader in so many aspects, right? We've got the most computer scientists degrees and of any state. We're um, leaders in a lot of startups, whether, folks stay here or not. You see a lot of the startups in this space being born here. So it's a really special place, Massachusetts, and that is why I was so excited, honestly, to jump into this role, is because my background, I really can fully appreciate um, that. That place where the academics are done this fantastic research, and then it turns into something that's applied, and we're able to solve real world issues, and bring impactful solutions, whether it's new products and ideas brought to life in that way, but also helping to bring public good, right, societal impact in different ways. So excited about what's possible here through the hub and through the collaborations of folks coming together across different areas.
So thinking about kind of some of those products, before we get into that, I'll say from someone who's played around with several AI products. I grew up in Silicon Valley. I remember kind of the first voice to text tools in the 90s. It does seem like every technology product is touting some sort of AI component now. It's, generative images, predictive text that I keep trying to turn off because I'm in the writing business. So I wonder, as a savvy user or consumer, when you see AI on something, does that actually tell you something useful? Because you're trying to figure out what useful and productive and ethical AI looks like from kind of the state level. So do you have a fine-tuned sense of what it means when you see that little AI symbol slapped on something right now?
I think a lot of companies are adopting AI right now, and so we're seeing AI added to names of products or companies, and that's okay, right? And they're going to be in different places in their journey right now. So I don't know that it necessarily signals where they are specifically in that journey, of course, but it's good to see that they're taking the step forward to try and adopt the technology.
And on a human level, what AI tools do you use in regular life, and how?
I've been actually rotating around to try, different tools to understand how they might be similar or different. The use cases, things like booking travel, vacations, right? With my family, it's a big one. I also have 3 kids. Sometimes I like to have ChatGPT, for example, create a story that involves them, right, for bedtime, and that's always fun. They love to see their names come up in these kind of stories, but also for productivity. With what I'm doing, or even the built-in tools to help you schedule meetings faster, right? It's nice to see the benefits come in. where it's useful. And I know there's a learning curve that's happening, on using the tools for folks, but also on the other side, how people like to use the tools. And so I think we'll continue to see improvements, right? You mentioned as a writer, right? Sometimes it's helpful, probably sometimes it's really annoying. And so they're going to figure that out as you use it and get better.
So the opposite question is, when do you choose not to use AI? When a tool is available and you say, actually, I have X set of expertise, or I want to have kind of this human one-to-one connection. What does it feel like when you say, maybe not, it's a tool and I don't always have to use it?
Yeah, I think the parallel might even be the calculator, right? Sometimes there are things that are just easier for you to quickly solve. Like we know so many simple equations so quickly, it's memorized, right? That it would take more time to pull your calculator out and punch something in and get the answer, right? Versus, maybe something that's very complex. And so that's similar with AI, right? There are some things that it's just going to be easier for you yourself to do, but there are tasks that AI makes a huge impact on and time savings. When there is quite a bit of data to work with, AI doesn't get tired sorting through that data and cleaning it up, or whatever task you need to be done with it. It's a tool, so you can be judicious on how you use it.
And so, when the AI Strategic Task Force that you mentioned, and so that was created, I think, in February 2024, if I'm recalling correctly. So, they were describing the goals of the AI Hub that it recommended creating. And it said specifically that it was for Massachusetts to lead in using AI in the right ways to solve problems and drive economic growth for the state. So, I'd like to get into a few of the kind of principles that it highlighted. And it's a little bit out of order, but I think to get it out there as early as possible, a stated goal from the task force was to encourage AI adoption. So this isn't a project of considering whether or not the state and businesses in Massachusetts should be incorporating AI, right? But choosing to ride this wave and figuring out how. This is kind of an affirmative process, right?
Absolutely. And there's a great line in the opening of that task force where, this is a technology that, uh, AI is a technology that could become a force for good or for ill, right? And so that depends on our actions as people and how we're using it. And so the AI Hub is focused on applying the AI. It's focused on helping people adopt AI into their work and what they're doing and upskilling themselves with AI. And so we really are focused on obviously the good, adoption of the good, and making it useful and productive. So um, that's of course a bedrock principle in what we're doing.
The number one principle, kind of to that point, was equitable and ethical development and deployment of AI. So, what are the frameworks that you are using to figure out what ethical deployment of AI looks like?
Absolutely. So again, I mentioned working groups, right? We have folks that are ethicists involved who are making sure we're thinking about that. One of the other principles is around making equitable access to data, and so we're standing up a data commons, and we're making public state data sets. So that there'll be equitable access to the public data. And so we're absolutely thinking about that as we design that out and start to build um, opportunities for shared collaboration. We're thinking about, event spaces. Can we create open events where folks can get access to maybe venture capitalists that they would not have otherwise had access to? So thinking about designing opportunities in that way as well. Um, We've also already kicked off, a couple programs in professional development. If I can highlight a couple here, one is Future Ready. We executed in June, and it was a 50-hour professional development course for teachers that came together from around the state, and they learned how to build curriculum using AI, right? Using generative AI tools, and then we're going to follow them throughout the course of the year for a total of a 50-hour program and learn from what their experiences are, and they can share experiences with each other as well as they come back together. So that's an example of a program where we were looking to design it to be an equitable opportunity for folks to learn.
And I wonder, is there a thread from kind of your work? I'm thinking specifically about self driving cars, which are sort of in and of themselves an ethical trolley problem. Sort of how do you want an object that is inherently dangerous to behave in a normal situation, an unusual situation, and a worst case situation? And so all of those are sort of freighted ethically with how do we feel about people? How do we feel about safety? How do we feel about good design? And I'd imagine there's also a parallel into thinking about what ethical ways we should kind of be, I suppose, approaching the best tools for the best circumstances. So when you're to kind of clarify this in a simple question here, which is when you're trying to figure out what would set off a little ethical alarm bell, thinking about your prior work, is there something that kind of comes to mind when you want it to proverbially slam on the brakes?
Great analogy. So yes, obviously, with the self-driving cars, the ethics was a question from the beginning, right? There are going to be accidents that happen, and they're going to be different than the ones that would have happened had humans been driving. However, they are a drop in the bucket compared to the 40,000 lives that are lost in the US alone each year. And so that's a moral question. And we from the beginning were always concerned, like, even if we solve this really, really hard problem, which we now are, um, well on our way to solving, and we're seeing the proliferation of Waymo and others in cities and the adoption. We were worried about that adoption from the beginning. Were folks going to be able to accept that moral issue? And so, we are seeing this hockey stick of adoption. And so I think, it is something that folks, as they experience it and become more comfortable with it, that will be see. But we still have to watch and see, right? When a major accident does happen during the course of this rollout, what is the reaction that the public will have to it? I've heard that this is a parallel even for reading radiology scans, right? AI is able to do that with a higher percentage of accuracy. However, there will still be these incorrect readings that could potentially happen, and maybe a human in that case might not have, but by and large, the humans would have had more human error. And so, how do you think about that, right? And uh, one of the things that I think is a great parallel in that example to the self-driving cars example is that we had humans we have humans in the loop in the self-driving cars, right? We had test drivers behind the wheel, even though they weren't driving, they were there to take over. And then we shifted to having the concept of remote operation observation, right? Not a remote control person far away, but observing the cars. And so when we think about in the healthcare space, and like, I'm pulling the thread on the radiology example, would you have the AI operating in parallel to the humans reading it and see, like, how that goes, and then folks might be able to accept as they see what the realities are, right?
I'm glad that you kind of brought up the human contribution side of things, right? Because I wonder if you could walk me through where the people are in some of these processes. Because the fear, of course, is from a labor perspective that it will eliminate jobs in a sort of mechanical sense. And then from a person's perspective, there's this worry that white collar industries will deem workers essentially unnecessary, that creative fields will essentially be sapped for their work and then kind of replaced with AI generated art, that sort of thing. So throughout your career, and then thinking about kind of 2 months into heading up this new AI Hub initiative here, what does it mean to kind of be a person and a worker in an age where businesses are leaning in on AI usage? And where can the state kind of help soften some of those blows?
I'm excited for how the state can support the shifts in jobs that may happen from the adoption of AI, right? As folks need to learn new skills, the state can provide pathways to do that, to provide courses. And we're in those discussions now, and um, being able to make that easy for folks to access. Pulling on the thread again on the cars, the self-driving car space. We saw a shift there I just described, where there was no longer a need for test drivers in the vehicles, but there was suddenly this need for now this remote operation command center folks. So it's a different skill set that we had to train them to have within the company. So absolutely, um, I think there will be needs for folks to learn new skills, and we can support that.
And you mentioned, of course, the interest in high quality, ethically governed data sets, which is another, of course, priority of the task force there. So, basic level, what does that mean? What makes for an ethically governed data set?
Yeah, sure. So, deep discussions on this topic. So, one of the things is bias detection. That's a simple piece that we can build into the data commons, and are building into the data commons, to make sure that it it's you have awareness around whether or not this data set has bias in it. And just that awareness alone allows you to go in and correct for that, and ensure that you have something where it is not, skewing results in a certain direction. I think ethics and around the data sets in general, right? Like I mentioned, making sure that there is equitable access to data. We're seeing folks more and more hold on to data sets. And so there's an inequality that can arise from that. And so we're doing what we can to make sure we can provide as much open access to the data as possible.
And how are you thinking about kind of the human hand element in that as well when we're thinking about accuracy? Because we know AI programs can hallucinate, they can misinterpret, even though it looks different from an AI model than it looks like when a human misinterprets something. So, how are you approaching the need to still have people either in kind of the remote operation of these self driving cars, or oversight of self driving cars, of making sure that if educational tools are spitting out educational syllabi or something like that, that you're still making sure that they're not saying George Washington actually had a jetpack attached to his body. How do you approach those questions, which do seem to require a human hand?
I'll answer that from the perspective of the data commons collaborative that we're building out. Collaborative is in the name, right? And that is a collaborative space where humans are there, right? And can have a shared space to identify and to um, bring to light where there are issues. And it's going to take a community of hands, right, to make sure what we have and are putting forward is correct. um, Absolutely, AI does not need to go unchecked by humans. We are, using the AI as a tool, and should continually monitor to make sure that it is providing that. And so we will have governance over the data commons as well, from that perspective.
And then thinking about how much computing power is actually required here to run these programs. If I recall correctly, the hub works with the Massachusetts Green High Performance Computing Center, which is, in case anyone is unfamiliar, a Holyoke based intercollegiate high performance computing facility. One thing that was interesting as I was going through it is I guess it's the first university research data center to be LEED Platinum certified. And the reason that I bring this up, as people are aware, is because AI takes a tremendous amount of power and resources for its training and use. And one, I'll kind of let you speak to the way you're approaching the resource need aspect to it, but this also seems to key into that ethical question, right? Is the environmental impact of this computing power part of the framework for ethical AI deployment if it starts needing more power than can reasonably be provided?
Absolutely. The environmental sustainability aspect of this is one of the core principles that we're considering at the AI Hub. And so, to that end, we've made a $31 million investment in expanding that Massachusetts Green High Performance Compute Center. And that is a shared access that we're providing for universities to come together and collaborate, for startups that we will make this available for and help lower the bar on some of the compute and storage costs that they face as they scale their companies. And that's a huge impact when you think about the compute resources that are required over the coming just handful of years. Exponential amount of energy is required. So it's really important that we're able to provide that in a sustainable way.
And I think the last thing that I want to hit on is the educational side of this. There's been a lot of concern about the way that AI has been used in classrooms and by students and professors from, K-12 all the way up to undergrad and then through graduate schools, if professors are using it for grading and evaluating. How are you approaching the question of, is AI not just kind of this growing, rapidly adopted tool, but the question of whether or not it's kind of good for the people who are using it during the time when they're kind of trying to learn how to think? I think that for a lot of us who, again, are in these kind of writing and communication fields, feels a little bit odd where you're saying, well, I wouldn't know how to know if this sentence is grammatically correct if I never had to write it in the first place. So I wonder how you're thinking about the best use of AI in these sort of very critical moments of intellectual development.
Sure, yeah, and it's a question I ask myself too, just having three young kids too, and then going through this journey. I will say that again, the role of the Mass AI Hub is really to convene the experts in these different areas. And so, we're fortunate to be partnered with DESE, who's really focused. They have their own task force on bringing AI into the K through 12 space. We've got Project Lead the Way that we're partnered with and have built out that program I mentioned earlier. But how I think about it right now in an actionable way at the Mass AI Hub really is to be focusing on the good use of it, obviously. And one example of that is another program that's going on now for the course of July, which is we've got 50 students. We partnered with the Burlington High School. They've got a number of districts, 8 different districts that have come together here with those 50 students, where they're learning Python, they're learning how to classify cells as cancerous or not. They're being able to, we've partnered with local industry as well, and they're able to go into those companies and work on real world problems and practice their presentation skills, right, all using AI. So it's really just focusing on what's good and moving forward on what we know is going to be fundamentally helping those folks on the kind of the high school side of that spectrum.
All right. Well, sadly, that is all the time we have for today. But Sabrina, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Codcast.
And enjoy the conversation. Thank you, Jennifer.
Of course. Have a good one. Thanks again to Sabrina Mansur for joining me on the Codcast. Thank you for listening. I'm Jennifer Smith. Our producer is Charlie Cazella. Leave a rating and review wherever you're hearing this now if you want to help other people find us, and email codcast@commonwealthbeacon.org if you ever want to get in touch directly. We'll be back next week.